welcome everyone to the Jerusalem Institute of Justice's live wartime webinar. Our briefing today is titled Beyond the Headlines, Lebanon, the Saudi Wildcard, and the New U.S. Playbook in the Middle East. For those of you who have been following the Jerusalem Institute of Justice's work, you know that we don't just talk about the narrative war, that we actually fight it ourselves too. So many of you have already seen our new documentary, Saturday, October 7th. It just debuted on Apple TV and Amazon Prime, guys. And it's now available on Amazon Prime, and it's available to counter the media's historical revisionism. So I'm going to tell you later about how you can help us fight the trolls to suppress that film later in our broadcast. But right now, we're here because there's a strategic shift that's happening behind the scenes in the Middle East. And we want to move past the sound bites. We want to analyze the realpolitik of the current crisis and help you understand what does the last 47 days mean for the future of Israel and for the future of the West and the Middle East region as a whole. So please join me in welcoming veteran Jerusalem-based journalist Nicole Jansezian. She is our guest today. Nicole is the host of the Inside Scoop Jerusalem, and I highly recommend that you follow her reporting. I'm going to drop the links to her website and her YouTube channel into the Zoom chat right now. Here you go, everybody. And go ahead and click those links and open them in a new tab so that you will have them for later. So Nicole, if you can unmute yourself, let's bring you on because you have years of experience reporting from the heart of the Middle East. You provide on-the-ground insights that really help to bridge the gap between the reality of the Middle East region and also Western perception, because those two things can be very far apart. So let's get right into it. My first question for you is the U.S. is currently brokering talks between Lebanon and Israel. So can you cut through the noise for us, help our audience understand who are the major players, what are the actual stakes, and what would a win look like for Israel here?
Awesome. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Monique. It's great to be here and to be able to discuss all of these issues. Absolutely fascinating. The past 40 to 47 days that we've gone through, where suddenly you had to like pull out a map and be like, oh my gosh, like all these countries involved and what's happening and who's running what country. So Lebanon is, interestingly enough, it's like that what's happening with Lebanon right now, and it's the first time that Israel and Lebanon have had direct talks in over 40 years. They're basically two countries in a state of war. They don't have diplomatic relations. And so the fact that I think it was their ambassadors met, the Israeli ambassador, the Lebanese ambassador to the US met with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the US, brokering the talks. So I don't think there was much that came out of that initially, but just the fact that it happened, I think, is extremely dramatic. And I dare say that if everything stays status quo with the war with Iran, that this could possibly be, in my opinion, this could probably be the biggest outcome of the war, that there is some sort of possibility of normalization between Israel and Lebanon. Now, the whole thing, and I'm sure your viewers are aware of this, that Hezbollah is the Iranian proxy group that's based in Lebanon and sort of like they control, like they're entrenched in southern Lebanon. And as the Iranian proxy group, but they are kind of a standalone militia on their own. They had upwards of 150,000 to 200,000 weapons like missiles, rockets, drones, even before the war started, like October 7, 2023. And also, I think they have something like 100,000 fighters in their army. So it's a very formidable group. And so they have they of course are there, to as the front line against Israel, but also they have gotten involved in the politics of Lebanese society, and they're in the government, they're in society, they are also like humanitarian in some ways, so they're very influential. But what you see now that with these talks that are going on is that the Lebanese people are finally, in some ways, saying, okay, we've had enough. And also the fact that they have been unable to, they passed, I think they voted in parliament in the fall of last year that to disarm Hezbollah and all other militias in Lebanon, and they haven't yet been able to do it, or they haven't done it. The Lebanese army hasn't done it, and I think in some ways they're looking right now at the mutual benefit. Like for Israel, of course, does not want Hezbollah there, and I think now you see more people in Lebanon coming to that also that conclusion that we need to do something. We need to get rid of them, and there are more and more voices speaking out against them. Now, all of that aside, it doesn't mean that the Lebanese are suddenly going to love Israel. There is a lot of anti-Israel sentiment in Lebanon, and so it's not necessarily going to smooth that over right away. But if the governments can come to some understanding and bypass Hezbollah and then figure out a way to disarm that group, whether it's through the Lebanese army or with the help of the Israeli army, which the Israeli army is currently actually doing in a way, because they're in Lebanon, they're fighting, and they have troops on the ground there. So if that can happen, then I think that would be, so far in looking at all of the results of the war in the whole region, I think that could be one of the biggest results, the most positive of the entire war.
Yeah, I think what was really interesting this morning was Ambassador Yechiel Leiter. He's Israel's ambassador to
Hmm.
the United States, who participated in those talks that you mentioned. He did a press gaggle and was asked the question, what about the French? Because the French had tried to position themselves as mediators. And he made a
Hmm.
very blunt comment. He said, we're basically trying to keep the French as far away from these talks as possible, and we don't consider their involvement to be constructive in any way. My personal take on that is that I've seen that the French want to reinforce the United Nations peacekeeping group, UNIFIL, which has been stationed on the border for decades now, has allowed Hezbollah to build tunnels underneath its own bases, has not actually succeeded in disarming any single Hezbollah operative. What's your take on the French and the role that they're playing in Lebanon?
Well, right now, I don't actually. Basically what I see is America moving in to Lebanon. And that's something that's been going on for a couple of years. Now, I understand that the French have history there, but in the recent politics, I really see a lot of plays with Lebanon, like from the US, from Trump's previous term. And also, again, like the people that he's appointed, they're really putting Lebanon front and center in the Middle Eastern agenda. So I I don't necessarily have a view on what the French involvement could be or should be or even is. It's just that I see America saying, okay, enough, like let's solve these issues. And you see they're doing it in Syria, for better or for worse. I mean, that's a whole other hornet's nest there. But you see that they're doing that in Syria, and I think they've been doing it in Lebanon for several years, and only now are we really seeing the fruit of that. The fact that, listen, Lebanon, France never got Israel and Lebanon to the table, to a mutual table. The fact that the U.S. did that, and for any foreign policy that you might, with good reason, not like about what American foreign policy, this is a milestone in foreign policy. So I just see it as an American play that has sidelined the French. And by the way, the UNIFIL officers are, a few of them have gotten killed. I think maybe it's the casualty count is five in this particular round, and sometimes it's just crossfire. It's not or it's by Hezbollah. So it's, they're probably going to want to get out of there as well. I mean, you would think, down in southern Lebanon. So it's going to be very interesting
Mhm.
how it plays out.
So, since you started talking about the more ambitious and constructive U.S. role, let's talk about this persistent media narrative that Israel has dragged America into a broader regional conflict. So, as a Jerusalem-based reporter, how do you respond to that narrative?
I would say as an American or as an observer of politics, I don't think Donald Trump, who even like just portrayed himself as like Jesus Christ a few days ago, he doesn't get dragged into anything. Like Donald Trump doesn't get dragged. Now, did Israel want the war? 100%. I mean, they have been talking about going after Iran, the head of the octopus. I think that was former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. His philosophy was he called it the head of the octopus strategy. Like if you go for the head, the arms will not be able to survive. Speaking of the proxies, so it has been in the Israeli playbook for years to go to war with Iran somehow or another. And obviously, look at the intelligence that they had on the ground to be able to do what they did. I mean, you could argue with the results and whether you call it victory or not victory, but just the fact of what they did accomplish means that it's the result of years of studying the ground there and having sources and having intelligence and having strategy. Now, so Israel 100% wanted to go to war, but I cannot imagine that the American administration, headed by President Donald Trump, was forced. Nobody forces Donald Trump. I can't imagine that they were tricked because there's too many people to be able to say that they they gave us different intel or some America is a country that probably matches Israel in military and intelligence. And so I can't imagine that they were hoodwinked by Prime Minister Netanyahu's desire to go to war with Iran. Now, so I don't think that America was dragged.
So, let's talk about the Gulf as a region as a whole and help us
Mhm.
understand Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis' interest in this war. The Emiratis have taken a lot of hits from ballistic missiles and drones. The
Yeah.
Saudis have as well. So is there maybe let's get into that first. And then if you have time, I want to get into whether there's credibility to these rumors that the Saudis actually want this conflict to run this course to weaken Iran. So
Yeah.
take that in whatever direction you like.
Okay. All right. Well, for starters, I saw a statistic that the Gulf states, all right, of all of the Iranian ballistic missiles that were launched, that Iran launched from its soil, that Israel only got hit or like only got 17% of them, and that the 83% were spread over Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Oman, Qatar, even Qatar. So I have to say that if you watch geopolitics and if it fascinates you, that this war was on the first day when we woke up and we heard sirens here and we're used to okay, it felt like kind of October 7th all over again because you're in Jerusalem, you get sirens and they're not as frequent, but you're like, oh wow, okay, so this is playing out again. But then you check the news and you're like, wait a second, it's not just us, it's not just Israel. And I saw like UAE, Bahrain, and so there are a few theories out there. The one that, in Iran, obviously they hit them very hard, all of these Gulf states. So there are a few theories that one was that hit them hard and hurt their pocketbooks so that they pressure the Americans to stop the war. So that was one. And then the other one was just to weaken their neighbors. So it was just interesting for me to see that Iran immediately just started hitting all of the Gulf. And one result of that was that it's probably clarifying for these countries who really is an ally and who isn't. Now, I've also heard it said that with Middle Eastern politics or Gulf politics, all of these countries, that there's always a handshake, with one hand and a sword behind their back on the other. And just it's a region that has trust issues. But it's also a region that has very sharp economic interests. And so that could be what we will see come out of this. So all that being said, all these countries came under attack. Now, what I see is possibly a clarification of, okay, well, Israel and, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Not that they're all enemies with Israel. The UAE and Bahrain aren't. But then there's Qatar and there's, Saudi Arabia's like, friend, but not officially. And then the Kuwait, Oman. But with them coming under attack and with the same interests as Israel economically, the Strait of Hormuz being open for them, that's a crucial issue, that it could drive these countries toward better relations or establishing relations with Israel. Now, and I think this is what you were getting at, that what this could do is, like, if you look at the map, you've got the Persian Gulf on one side, and then all the way across, there's like the Red Sea to the east, I mean, to the west, and it doesn't go all the way up, and then after that is the Mediterranean. And from land to land, you can go from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, so all of these countries now are going, they're shipping like through the Strait of Hormuz, and then some through the Red Sea, and then they get out into the waters. But what could happen, and what Saudi Arabia already started doing, was shipping by land. Like, okay, you're going to block us in the Gulf, no problem. And they were shipping down to the Red Sea. But what could happen then in the future is, if there are relations with Israel that open up, that they could ship to land all the way across to the Mediterranean Sea, and then from there be even closer to Europe, and then avoid all of the, going down south of Africa and coming back up. So it's actually like, I don't know that this is what somebody was looking at, and I'm not saying that this was the end game, but when I looked at the map, I was like, oh, this is something that I'm sure others have already thought of and might be thinking, okay, let's lay some pipe. There were pipelines being laid several years ago, but now could be the time to even go up to the Mediterranean Sea.
So, the port of Ashdod is a pretty natural destination spot for that pipeline. The Saudis give off a lot of rhetoric about how they won't normalize with Israel until Israel recognizes a Palestinian state, or Israel takes, irreversible steps toward Palestinian statehood. They kind of change a little bit in their rhetoric. Do you think that there's a likelihood that they drop that rhetoric because their economic interests are in the driver's seat?
I know that issue is still going to be very important to them, but I think, like you were saying, like it might be nuanced in a different way in the future. Like, it may not be contingent on statehood now and then we'll sign. It could be, like you said, steps. Let's take steps, and so, of course, now the ink isn't even dry on the Gaza ceasefire before this started. We're still, like, that happened, that was in October, and it was still, we had just finished the, like, phase one, and they were moving into phase two, and somebody remarked to me, like, wow, we never hear about Gaza anymore. There are things happening in Gaza. They're still fighting. They're still, like, Israel has its military zone in Gaza, and but we haven't heard yet what's happening. Now, Israel and the US can always say, okay, but are you going to finance this state? Are you going to finance the reconstruction? So I think now everybody's got cards in their hands. So it's not just, let's say, Saudi Arabia saying, well, you didn't, recognize a Palestinian state, or you didn't establish it. It could be like, you want it? Are you going to pay for it? So I mean, I'm just, like, throwing out the possibilities that could come to play. I think they're still going to stand with the Palestinians in some way, but I think the way they do is going to change.
Yeah. Now, can you talk about the Emiratis and their interests and how they're
Mhm.
positioning themselves in this war?
Yeah, they also they were interesting. They are very tactful and diplomatic in their speech, and they even said, like, while they condemned Iran's use of ballistic missiles against them, and they're like literally they're just right across from, yeah, from Iran. Like, I wonder, I don't know if you can see the two countries, but they're that close as opposed to Israel, and they were shooting, like firing ballistic missiles at them, and they did not respond militarily, but they responded with a lot of talk. And it seems like they're just a country that just wants to keep the peace, keep the status quo. They said in a statement after, that that we condemn, or it was something like we agree with the ceasefire of the war that we never wanted to start in the first place. So you can see that they have very legitimate fears because they are that close to Iran. Their economy is dependent on that Gulf and on that strait. So they are walking a fine line. Now they're much smaller. Of course, there's also Bahrain. Bahrain's like a dot on the map. You can't even, if you show a map, you've got to like expand it just to even see Bahrain, and they're like in a similar position. But I think for the UAE, this was, but with its proximity and its smaller size, it I think they were more concerned than some of the other countries. And I think you can see that in their statements and their lack of taking military action and just sort of hoping that they would get away with few casualties, which they did. And they got away with few casualties. There were not that many. But so they took a very interesting stance on that, I think, rode all of the diplomatic lines.
So there's chatter in the media about interceptor stocks. The Emiratis, rely heavily on the very expensive U.S. Patriot missiles,
Mhm.
and to use a Patriot missile against a drone, it's a maybe $1 million Patriot missile against a $50,000 drone. The economics don't work, and so Vladimir Zelensky, the very Jewish president of Ukraine, has
Yes.
come in with his solution. He
Yes.
said, "Well, we've been battling these drones that the Russians have been sending
Yep.
over our skies, and we have a little helicopter drone which fights that drone." So it's been interesting to see how he's walked into the Middle East and positioned himself as a helpful and useful ally. To me, that seemed interesting to see that some of the Gulf states, which have traditionally been aligned with Russia, are now seeing it within their interests to play a little bit of a different
Yes.
game and to be a little bit more invested in Ukraine's security. So, that's another wild card that's happening as a result of this war. Another wild card is we see Iranian nationals living all over these Gulf countries. They run businesses. They live in Dubai. They live in Abu Dhabi. They set up shop in Qatar. Some of them are regime affiliated. Some of them are not regime affiliated. We see the United States government going very aggressively against regime affiliates in the United States and some of their spoiled children. Any reflections on any of those things I just brought up?
Yeah, that's I totally forgot about Zelensky's tour in the middle of the war, because so much happened in 40 days. It felt like a year. And that's right. At some point I looked up and I'm like, wait a second, he's like on his third country or something right now. And he would, yeah, and obviously with the drones, and that will be a very interesting development in like as the alliances shift and maybe reconfigure, that suddenly they're more aligned with Ukraine instead of Russia. Now, Russia is still, let's say also because Russia is with Iran, that's probably also part of what Zelensky took the moment, seized the moment to be like, let me insert myself with now, with the against Russia's ally in the region. So yeah, so it's very interesting. There's also interesting ties between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And Pakistan hosted
Can
the
you can you explain why would Pakistan host these talks between the
yeah,
U.S. and
yeah.
Iran?
Right. I was like, where did they come from? I mean, they came out of the blue. Usually, like when we've had in the last couple of years, uh, um, negotiations, like when Israel's been involved in negotiations, the brokers have been Qatar, Egypt, sometimes Turkey, and suddenly it's Pakistan. And I'm like, where'd they come from? So it's very interesting. First of all, they have good relations with both the US and Iran. They have a 900-kilometer border with Iran, and I think that's about 500 miles. So they are also, I think they have a 20% Shiite population. And I think one of the concerns that I read somewhere was that if Iranian Shiites, if the regime gets overthrown and people flee the border, they didn't want to like stir up the population with any like sectarianism. Anyway, that was one thing. But also, they have an economic crisis, and they need to stay on the US's good side. But at the same time, they have good ties with Iran. They have actually $10 billion trade agreements with Iran in all different industries. And then one of the biggest interests, and this is probably more so from Iran than Pakistan, is that they are the first Muslim nation to acquire a nuclear weapon. So, of course, this has been the presumed desire of Iran. This is what instigates all of the sanctions and fighting and conflict and everything. So with that being said, it's almost like somebody described, an analyst I was reading described it as like Iran sort of looking up to Pakistan, like, how did you do it? Like, give us some advice. Like, we also want to. And I think how Pakistan did it was also like behind the scenes. Like, suddenly it's like, oh, we got a nuclear weapon, and like it was like under the nose of every other country that said, no, you can't have one. So anyway, it looks like they have a lot to share, like technology wise and also strategy with Iran about the nuclear weapon. So in the meantime, they're also strong allies with Saudi Arabia. I just read right before the webinar that the Prime Minister of Pakistan is in Saudi Arabia right now for an official visit. So, what's going on there? Now, Saudi Arabia being a victim of Iran in this particular war. Again, they did not fight back, as far as I know, or, in a large capacity, if at all. But they now are hosting Pakistan, which is hosting the talks, which may continue the ceasefire talks, even though the first round failed. Apparently, they're going to continue. So it's like a tangled web over there in that region.
So two things I'm thinking as you're discussing this. First, I see a critical distinction between Pakistan and Iran on the nuclear question. They're both Muslim countries, of course, but Pakistan's military regime seems slightly less psychotic than Iran's. The IRGC is a Mukawama sect of 12 Shias who believe that they're going to usher in and bring back the Mahdi by destroying Israel and America, Israel being the little Satan, America being the big Satan. So the idea is that we can't entrust such a psychotic regime with such a powerful weapon when the raison d'etre of your own foreign policy for the last 47 years has been the destruction of Israel. Pakistan does seem like a little bit more, slightly more of a rational player. It does privilege its own economic interests. It is sometimes trying to address the needs of its own citizenry. There has not been a very recent massacre of Pakistani citizens at the hands of their own regime, like there has been in Iran. And I'm forgetting my second non sequitur, but I think there's an important distinction there.
True.
I want to bring this to my final question before we go to the audience for Q&A, which is you mentioned that the ceasefire talks might get revived. It seems like maybe one of the pivotal factors there was the U.S. instituting a full blockade to push the Iranians back to the negotiating table. Mm-hmm. We've seen that in prior U.S. administrations, almost every single administration for the last 47 years has been negotiating with the Iranian regime. And generally speaking, it's the Iranians who have the leverage. So we might see that the U.S. has some leverage here. But if the music stopped today, and if the current lines were just frozen in place, who do you think comes out with the upper hand?
Well, that is a great question. And it's funny because do you believe what the governments say? Because everybody's claiming victory. Everybody said they're victorious in this. So, but as far as the upper hand, it's extremely interesting. There's a couple ways this could go, and I was even thinking, that despite the fact that President Trump keeps talking about, we want peace, we're so close, we want to end this, and all of every day he's saying something more and more like that. America still has 50,000 troops in the region. They have warships going there. They have aircraft. They haven't withdrew. They haven't withdrawn. There's no bombing right now, but they haven't withdrawn. And so I only, and of course, because I think we live in a little bit of PTSD now with like surprise wars over here, that nobody wants to let down their guard, and everybody's wondering, is Trump bluffing again? Because let's be real, like the Iranian points and the US points are night and day. They're not coming to the, like, I could see that Lebanon and Israel would be able to make more progress on an agreement than I would see Iran and the US, at least according to what both parties have said. So upper hand, look, Iran was badly a lot of their infrastructure, their weapons supplies, they were very badly damaged. Obviously, their leadership, took some big hits. But I have heard people who study Iran, like from an intelligence point of view, that the regime is made to like regrow itself. So, and also it's comprised of a million uh, participants, like at different levels. Like there's a million people in the government and in the IRGC and and actually I don't know fully the breakdown of how the government works, but they said that it's not a regime you can change. Now, that's one side. On the other side, I've interviewed analysts that say that it's like if you keep replacing parts on your car with a replacement part, that eventually it's going to fail, it's going to break, because the replacement parts are never as good as the original. The original has institutional memory, has experience, and knows what has the strategy. You keep replacing, by the time you get to the fourth or fifth replacement, they don't know what to do, and they're only operating in the now, not the future of where we wanted to take this country and this theology. So I have no idea what's going to happen there. I don't know which one is right. Both sound really convincing, but that's just Iran. Now, Israel will just still have to be in a defensive mode until something changes there, because that can pop up at any time. They're dealing with the threat in the north. The Houthis in Yemen have been very quiet. I don't know if that's like a permanent condition or if they're going to pop up. And Hamas, though it has reasserted itself and probably still has, they're governing the strip, and they probably still have weapons. They probably still have some tunnels, but they're extremely weakened. So Israel will be in a defensive posture. And then there's the US, and I don't know what the US gets out of it. So in terms of who has the upper hand, I spoke for 5 minutes and totally evaded your question because I honestly don't know. I do know who got the worst end of the deal, and I think it's the Iranian people who were hoping to see regime change. And I think that with the roundups that are going to go on now, that have been going on, in the executions, I think, to me, the most obvious is the who got the worst hand in the deck. But as far as the upper hand, I don't think it's over enough to tell at this point. I think things still have to play out.
Yeah. And so it's worth just recapping what the United States has put out as their non-negotiables. They've said you will not have nukes. You will give us your fissile material. You will reopen the strait. You will not become a toll taker in the strait, although it's questionable whether or not the U.S. will give on that front if they can get the fissile material. You'll stop the ballistic missile program. So, of course, the Iranian regime wants completely the opposite. It wants the U.S. to promise to never again attack Iran. It wants no more nuclear inspections. And I think it wants to continue to immunize its nuclear program behind its wall of ballistic missiles, and certainly wants to strengthen that. And if it can get the naval blockade broken and the strait opened up, it can once again resume that supply chain from China of all the material pieces that they need in order to rebuild their ballistic missile program. Now, of course, the US and Israel have done intense damage to the infrastructure for that program, but all of that stuff is metal. It can all be rebuilt. And I think the Iranian regime has shown that it's pretty dedicated to rebuilding it. So it's time to move to our audience questions. At the top of the hour, I did mention, while you're thinking about your questions, by the way, use the Q&A function or go ahead and put those questions in the chat. And while you're thinking of them, I mentioned that we got our new documentary film on Amazon, which is really exciting. So I need your help with something really critical. The narrative war that we're discussing with Nicole, it's still happening on these platforms of Amazon and Apple TV. And the anti-Israel troll farms, they are already trying to review, bomb this film and bury the truth and get it removed from all the algorithms. We think this is an important film. We think that anybody who's on the fence about what happened on October 7th or who's been bombarded with propaganda about it should hear the unfiltered truth, the historical record, and should hear it straight from survivors. So go ahead and scan the QR code that's on your screen right now, or you can go to SaturdayOct7.com. Please rent the film, watch it tonight, and most importantly, guys, leave a thumbs up or a 5-star review. That review is a direct counteroffensive in the narrative war. So keep that tab open. And now let's move on to the questions from the audience. I've got one coming in from Paul, who asks, how has Israel financially supported the magnitude of 2.5 years of endless war, and how are they going to finance the recovery?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it's still in process because Israel's been living in a state of emergency for so long. It's not they're still dealing with war as opposed to other we're only just getting back into like the internal politics. So of course it's there are taxes that are going to be raised, and then there I guess that's mostly the answer, is just that they have to raise taxes now. As specifically how they're going to what do you call it? Do the give reparations to like business owners that were forced to shut down and stuff like that. That still remains to be seen. And I'm sure that's going to just become a legal battle, and so that will be prolonged. In the meantime, they're still kind of dealing with emergency, like enough interceptors, enough defense, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I don't even fully know the answer. I just know we're in for large sums over the next couple of years.
Yeah, quick plug for JIJ, because we're actually representing many of the people whose lives and businesses and bodies have been damaged by the war. And actually, you do need a good lawyer to help you through that. So we've secured 10 million in benefits for people who've been wounded as a result of this war. And we don't charge a single penny. We don't take any of that. And we need donations to keep that going. So next question, thanks for listening to my plug, is from Avi. Do you think about hegemony from Turkey has been stopped with the war, and more to be stopped by the Gulf state situation? We're observing the Moroccans are helping the Emiratis with military subjects and intelligence. Both states are part of the Abraham Accords. Africa is playing a role with the Gulf states. He says that's a good way. No, I think what he's saying is, what do you think about this?
Wow, that is a great question. That is an entire webinar on its own, because it's like so fascinating to drag Turkey into this. Oh my goodness, Turkey! I just read somewhere that Turkey has occupied now a part of Iraq that they were not before. And again, I have to go back and verify and find this out and everything. Turkey is probably not satisfied. They are probably going to get involved in some way. They're in Syria, they're in Iraq. And also now speaking of Africa, because if you know, a couple months ago, Israel became the first nation in the world to recognize Somaliland as an independent country. And that was like, well, where'd that come from? You know, it's totally out of the blue. Everybody's Googling Somaliland. What is that, like a new amusement park? No, it's a country that nobody recognized. And guess what? It is right across from, it's on the Bab el Mandab Strait, which is like the other side, I think, actually. No, it's across from Yemen. So yes, I think it's Bab el Mandab. And it's also across, since it's across from a strategic place for Israel. So now, then Turkey is involved in Somalia and some other countries over there. So I don't think Turkey's done. I don't think as with Erdogan, Turkey will ever be done trying to exert itself. And so I think it will still try. And also in the Gulf, I'm not sure how it's going to shake out entirely, but he's painted himself around the area, if not in the Gulf itself.
Hmm.
Was
So
there more to that question, or should like,
I think I love the Somaliland story. I've most of my
yes,
followers on X are from Somaliland, and that's because I have a, a late cousin of mine was an Israeli diplomat at the UN at the time of a pivotal moment in Somaliland's history. But that's for another webinar.
cool.
So let's keep with the audience questions. Shimon, he asks, IDF Chief of Staff Zamir recently warned cabinet ministers that the military manpower shortage could cause the IDF to collapse in on itself. Do you think the manpower shortage will eventually force the government into mass Haredi drafting? Where do you see the manpower crisis heading?
That is a great question. Of course, that's the issue that keeps coming back, that there is a mandatory army service here for 18-year-olds, boys and girls, have to join the army. But there are exemptions, and the exemptions now span more than 30% of the country because the Arabs are largely exempt, and they are like, if in some way or another they get exempt, and that's 20 to 22% of the population. And then the ultra Orthodox Jews are also 12 to 13% of the population, and they do not believe in serving in the army. It is the political issue of the ages. However, no easy way to solve it, because Netanyahu in government where his party serves, and by the way, his coalition is comprised of the national religious, which are big, nationalists, and they serve in the military. But the other part of his coalition are the ultra orthodox parties, and so to stay in power, they all have to come to an agreement, and it looks like they are not going to force a draft of the ultra orthodox. So at this point, I don't see it happening. Now, everybody's going to get a little lax right now because we have a ceasefire, but the reservists have been like going back like several times. So it's definitely a national issue that Israel has to deal with, and I don't know how they're going to, and
Mhm.
especially like Netanyahu, who's in charge of it right now.
Yeah. So Dennis asked several questions. I'll pick one of them. He says why is it so difficult to completely eradicate Hezbollah in Lebanon? Your thoughts?
They are very entrenched. I mean, it's a great question. They're entrenched geographically in one area specifically, but they're also all over the country. They have gotten them. They started out in Lebanon. I think it was in the 1980s, or maybe a little bit before that. But as a movement, as a charitable organization, as there to help and to finance, whether it's like welfare issues, hospital, schools, healthcare, things like that. So they sort of, and Hamas did the same thing in Gaza. So they came in, and won the hearts of the people, and also they are Shiite, and so the Shiites were also drawn to them. And it doesn't mean only Shiites like them, or but then they also became politically active, and they are very powerful. The I've heard it said that Hezbollah as a militia is actually more powerful than Lebanon's army. So that is why they are extremely hard to eradicate.
Yeah, I was sitting with a Lebanese Christian who moved to Saudi Arabia, who was reflecting on, he said, well, Hezbollah wasn't a threat 40 years ago. I said, why do you say 40 years? That's an interesting number. Why not 47? Why not 30? Why not 20? He said, well, before the Iranian regime existed, before the Iranian
Hmm.
Revolution, the Shia of southern Lebanon were farmers. And yes, there were a lot of them, and they lived in a certain area, and they lived next to Christians, but they didn't have weapons. With the rise of the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic, suddenly they had weapons, and they became this formidable fighting force, larger, as you said, than the Lebanese army. So another question, this is from Riyadh. What are the reported humanitarian impacts inside Iran, inside Israel, inside Lebanon, and the neighboring countries?
Great question. And I don't have much clarity on what's happening in Iran. The media there is state controlled, and the internet there has been out for 48 days. So you can only get one narrative. And so I don't know. I mean, obviously Iran was hit badly, infrastructure was damaged. I don't know the death toll in the reports. Now in Lebanon, it's another story. I think we have a little more clarity. The death toll is over 2,000, but I don't know the breakdown between operatives, terrorists, Hezbollah, and or civilians, but civilians have been killed. And also there's a large displacement. There's now, I think, over 1 million people from southern Lebanon are uprooted from their homes, because the Israeli military says, hey, evacuate this village, we are going to bomb it. And so there are, so on one side, oh great, you saved their lives. On the other side, they've got no home now. And so there's a crisis going on in Lebanon in terms of displacement. In Israel, I would say it's been more dealt with. The damage from the war was it's concentrated. It's not as pervasive, and that we had like fewer casualties here and like better defense systems. So I would say that there isn't necessarily a humanitarian crisis in Israel going on at the moment.
Yeah. Nevertheless, we've lost 24, I believe, civilians in this round of war,
Hmm.
and that includes several families killed together. 22 of the 24 casualties were people who were not inside their bomb shelters. And that's not just because people are crazy and lazy. That does happen. Some people are crazy and lazy, but the vast majority of these cases were elderly and disabled people who couldn't make it to their shelters on time. I think it's important for people to remember, if you live in Naharia, if you live up in the northern areas, you
Hmm.
maybe only have 15 seconds to get from the time of your red alert to get to shelter. And there's not a proliferation of bomb shelters despite perceptions. And
I I
if you're extremely elderly and you're getting 5, 6, 7 alerts in the middle of the night, it's very, very difficult to go down multiple flights of stairs with your caregiver and get there in time. Go ahead, Nicole.
No, I was going to say, I actually wrote an article about an organization that was petitioning the Supreme Court to get more accessible bomb shelters. Oh, and that would be Jerusalem Institute of Justice.
Yes.
So,
we
yeah, so that
continue
was.
we continue that fight. We had a breakthrough. The Jerusalem municipality did
Mhm.
set up an overnight accommodations for disabled people who want to go underground. So that's a fight we continue.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
well, that's all our time for questions. Nicole, I just want to thank you for cutting through the noise with us, giving us these critical on the ground insights. So before we sign off, where is the best place for people to follow your work?
Okay, thank you for asking. I would say if you love the breaking news, you have more questions, things like that, go to YouTube and join me on my lives, which I do not necessarily. I'm not scheduled yet, but like around later on, like maybe in an hour or so, whatever time that is in your time zone, and you can ask questions on YouTube. Also, if you just go to my website, you'll find everything. So nickjan.com, it's the first three letters of my first and last name. And then you'll be able to follow on Facebook as well, and Substack, and yeah, that'll bring you to everywhere.
Excellent. So I just put links to Nicole's website and YouTube in the chat. I want to thank you, everyone, for joining us. And before you go, remember your assignment. You go to Apple or Amazon. I'm putting the QR codes up on the screen. Watch our documentary. Leave a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Also, go to jij.org and make a donation in support of our life-changing work. So we will see you at the next briefing. Thank you, everyone.